I think we could say that in our present time, there's been a moral reawakening of our responsibility for creation that wasn't there in earlier years. I guess the best example of that would be that we have a papal encyclical, which was on about our care for creation, Laudato Si, which was in our recent time. Growing up, I can't ever remember when we go to confession, every couple of weeks or so, that I ever confessed anything about any damage I did to creation. But we do have, and I think the main factor that has caused this moral reawakening of our responsibility to creation has been the awareness of climate change and the debilitating effects of climate change, and that is what's caused the moral awakening. But also, I think what's happened too there's been a spiritual awakening of creation. For myself, and maybe for you too, a significant person who was a factor in awakening that spiritual need to take care of creation was the Jesuit priest Teilhard de Chardin. And he was a scientist, and yet he was a Jesuit priest, and he had a wonderful combination of joining the mystery of creation with the need to deepen spiritually with the Creator. And he really brought those two things together in a way that we had not seen or heard before, I think, him. And since then, I think there's been a development in our spiritual practices and our spiritual awareness about the need to care for the creation and the way to find an experience of God, of the Creator, in looking at creation and experiencing creation. This is kind of a new, I think, development, I would say, in our own spiritual development in our church today. And so there has arisen a phrase that, again, we did not know in earlier years, called creation spirituality. And that's sort of a new word for us. We may have an idea what it means, or we may not, but I think what draws many of us to hear it this afternoon is just, what does it mean? What's this? I hear about creation spirituality. So spiritual writers will speak about this, in their writings that we read, Richard Rohr, people like that, And what does it mean to say, I should have, or I could have, encourage us to have a deepening of our own spiritual development by reflecting, experiencing, making creation a part of our daily spiritual practices. So we've invited, with that concern in mind, we've invited Brenna Davis to come and speak to us today to talk about what is this creation spirituality. She is the Director of Integral Ecology for the Ignatian Spiritual Network. It's kind of a well-known Jesuit spiritual organization. And she was recommended to us by Steve Pope from Boston College, who earlier this past year gave us a talk on the Trump-era policies and practices in the light of Christian social justice teaching. And I asked him, is there anybody who could talk to us about creation spirituality? And he suggested that Brenna would be the best person to come. So at his suggestion, we've invited her to speak to us. My understanding is that most of her ministry is taken up with younger people. She's not used to being with all these older folks, but we'll see. But hopefully it'll be a good experience for her as well as for us. So I introduce you. Please welcome Brenna Davis.
I have like 7 microphones on me right now. Thank you.
What do I do with this?
All right, thanks for your patience. We're just going to pull up my presentation. Hopefully it's still here somewhere. There we go. Oh, though I don't know how to get it on the screen. Okay, like that. All right. Okay, gotta love an extended screen. Okay, great. Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Thank you to the team that planned opening prayer. Can we give them a round of applause? That was so beautiful. So Steve Pope was actually my professor. I went to Boston College. So in undergrad, he became one of my favorite professors, and I got to spend some time in El Salvador with him. And he really opened my eyes, or continued to open my eyes to the interconnections between faith and justice. So I'm grateful that he encouraged me to be here. A little bit about myself. I work at a place called the Ignatian Solidarity Network. So we are a national nonprofit, and we work with Catholic institutions. Sorry, I feel like there's like a little feedback here. We work with Catholic institutions across the country to help young people especially understand what does a faith that does justice look like, right? So I think that in this group, it seems like you all know the church's best kept secret, which is Catholic social teaching. And so we're trying to pass that on to the next generation. And Steve Pope was one of the teachers in my own life that inspired me to pass that on. So after I finished college, I did the Jesuit Volunteer Corps and got placed in Cleveland, Ohio. I never had a desire to live in Cleveland nor Ohio, so I don't have any beef with Michigan. I think you all are great. But I got placed there and then actually fell in love with the city, fell in love with the people, with a neighborhood of people who are like you. I'm actually in a lot of spaces like this a lot, with people who care about justice, with our local Catholic worker. And so, so that's what's brought me into this room today. But on my day job, I'm mostly working with high school students and teachers and trying to help them figure out what does it mean to live a faith that does justice for the earth on their Catholic high school campuses. I'm really sorry about this, y'all. Today we're going to talk about care for creation and creation spirituality. But for me, and I think for many of the people in this room, from what Father Tom has told me about you, we know that our spirituality calls us to act, right? It's not just for ourselves. It is a calling forth of us to live out our vocation for justice in the world. So I wanted today to be about you considering your place in the web of life, and what gifts you continue to have to share in this great shared work that we are called to together. I think it's very fitting that I ended up in Cleveland. We are, I don't know if you know this, but our river caught on fire so many times that we got an Environmental Protection Agency and a Clean Water Act. So thank you, Cleveland, for something. So with that spirit, we are going to, I'm going to figure out how this clicker works, I hope. Does anyone know how the clicker works? Okay, great. Great, just turning it on helps. Awesome. Thank you. See, you can teach me new things, right? We're all learning. So today, when I enter into ecology work and when I enter into creation spirituality work, I always invite people to think about this image of the web of life. And actually, back in 1991, our great U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops wrote this wonderful document called Renewing the Earth. And in it, they said, the web of life is one, right? And so we know that we are born into this web of life, that it is beautiful, that it is fragile, right? And that we are kind of all individual strands in this web. And so if one of us is not here, the web is not as strong. And so this is our invitation to enter into creation spirituality with this sense of unity and with a sense of deep gratitude. And so we're going to be talking a lot about gratitude as the heart of creation spirituality today. Nothing that I'm going to say today is new. It's actually all very, very, very old. And the basic understanding of creation spirituality, or ecological spirituality, as Pope Francis calls it in the Laudato Si Action platform, is really just anything that makes us feel deeply connected to this web of life. Okay? And anything in our Christian practice that helps us to feel connected to this web of life, right? So we're in this Easter season right now. We're in a season of resurrection, and looking out that window and everywhere, we can see the earth is resurrecting too, right? And so is there something that God is telling us or reminding us in God's creation that can be helpful and sustain us in our own lives, right? And so I love that you mentioned our buddy, Teilhard de Chardin, because he has, I think, his spirituality and his kind of way of seeing has really influenced my own, being Jesuit educated. And so this is an offering that maybe you're familiar with, but it's taken from his Mass on the World. And he was a scientist, he was a paleontologist. And at one point, the Jesuits shipped him off to China, to the far reaches, because they were really mad at him, and they had censored him because of some of his theology around original sin, right? He was like, well, Adam and Eve can't have really existed if we believe in evolution, so like, can we talk about this a little bit? And so he writes this beautiful piece when he is very far away. He says, "Since once again, Lord, though this time not in the forest of the Icene, but in the steppes of Asia, I have neither bread nor wine nor altar. I will raise myself beyond these symbols up to the pure majesty of the real itself. I, your priest, will make the whole earth my altar, and on it I will offer you all the labors and sufferings of the world." Right? And so I offer this up as our invitation in Christian Catholic eco-spirituality is to see all of the world as God's altar, right? That's our invitation, to see with eyes of wonderment, to see with the eyes of a mystic, and to see the Creator in everything that has been created. And so what I love about de Chardin is that he talks about the idea of spirit and matter. And so he is a priest, and he loves being a priest, and he loves God, but he also loves science, and he loves the earth. And he says, he has this beautiful quote that I didn't put in here, but there's a great PBS documentary about him. And in it, he says, he writes to his superiors and the Jesuits, and he says, "What you have taken for my obstinacy over the last 30 years is actually just my wonderment at this world. And I could not change that as much as I could change my eye color," right? And so he is like, I love spirit and matter, and if what I know about the Creator is that it's all holy, right? That it all comes together and it is all holy. And so that is our invitation as we enter into eco-spirituality, creation spirituality, is to understand that it's all holy. We're going to talk a little bit more about Laudato Si, but before I forget, because sometimes I get excited, I brought some worksheets with some eco-spirituality practices. You all are a very large group, and I didn't print enough, so I can email more. But there's a really beautiful quote from Pope Francis in this document. And I think for me, it was really heartening, because I was teaching at our Cristo Rey High School in Cleveland before Laudato Si was written. And we had an amazing curriculum. So I actually got to teach seniors ecological theology. I studied theology in undergrad. I love the environment, and their senior year theme was Care for the World. So I got to teach this ecological theology course before Pope Francis had written Laudato Si. So I wasn't quite making it up, but I didn't have as much good stuff as we have now. And so I often, there was and still is a lot of skepticism about care for creation, even though it's a part of Catholic social teaching and it's a part of everything that we do. And so sometimes I felt kind of like a bad Catholic, right? Am I doing something wrong if I see God in a tree, or St. Ignatius was sitting at the river Cardinere, just staring at the water, and that's when he had his greatest insight from God that changed his life, right? And so In this, in Laudato Si, Pope Francis writes, God has written a precious book whose letters are the multitude of created things present in the universe. The Canadian bishops rightly pointed out that no creature is excluded from this manifestation of God. From panoramic vistas to the tiniest living form, nature is a constant source of wonder and awe. It is also the continuing revelation of the divine, right? And so we know that God, the Creator, has divine revelation in the Scripture. We know that the Creator has divine revelation in our own lives, that we can learn from those experiences. But Pope Francis is saying, gosh, the Creator is in what they have created, right? This contemplation of creation allows us to discover in each thing a teaching which God wishes to hand on to us. Since for the believer to contemplate creation is to hear a message, to listen to a paradoxical and silent voice. We can say that alongside revelation, properly so called, contained in sacred scripture, there's divine manifestation in the blaze of the sun and in the fall of night. I express myself in expressing the world. In my effort to decipher the sacredness of the world, I decipher my own, right? So that's from Pope Francis. And that's not something that I think we explore much in the Catholic Church. And so what I'm going to invite us to do right now is we're going to be doing some eco-spirituality practices from the comfort of our own chairs. So you can do them anywhere. You don't have to be outside. So I'm going to read this passage from Laudato Si, and I'm just going to lead you through a short reflection. And I'm going to invite you to talk to someone near you. So if you're an introvert, get ready, okay? The entire material universe speaks of God's love and boundless affection for us. Soil, water, mountains, everything is, as it were, a caress of God. The history of our friendship with God is always linked to particular places which take on an intensely personal meaning. We all remember places, and revisiting those memories does us much good. Anyone who's grown up in the hills or used to sit by the spring to drink or played outdoors in the neighborhood square, going back to these places is a chance to recover something of their true selves. So I invite you now, if you want to close your eyes, you can, you don't have to, just to think about a particular place in your own life where you feel a sense of peace. It could be in nature, it could be indoors. Think about like a particular place where you just feel completely yourself, completely at peace. Maybe think back to childhood. Was there a particular patch of grass or a particular tree, somewhere that you liked to go? And I invite you now to just imagine yourself in this place and to use all 5 of your senses. So, what are you seeing? What time of year is it? What's the temperature like on your skin? Is there wind? Is there sunshine? Are there any particular smells? What does it feel like? Imagine in your mind's eye, if you reached out a hand to touch some water, some grass, or the bark of a tree, what would that feel like? And maybe particular tastes, I don't know if that fits. So just take a moment to be present there and notice how you feel. And I'm going to invite you to come back into the room, to open your eyes, and then we're just going to take about 2 minutes. I'm just going to invite you to turn to somebody near you and just share a little bit about your particular place, the place that came to mind. Where was it? Why is it special to you? If the first person is still sharing, take about 10 more seconds and then switch. Not tough. So you didn't have a partner. Do you have a place?
I did. There was a little brook when I was in college.
Oh.
I kind of run away to escape there. So I could feel the water bubbling. Friend.
Lovely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's very sweet.
Yeah. So we're going to take about 30 more seconds to share. Alrighty, let's finish our final thought, whoever's speaking. And maybe this is something you can circle back about during the break. So just out of curiosity, how many people's particular place had something to do with water? Yeah, I find that it's really interesting. I find that whenever I do this activity, a lot of people are really drawn to water, which is really beautiful. Again, if we're thinking about eco-spirituality and the call of our baptism and the beautiful creation story that we had at the beginning prayer of the earth being separated from the waters, right? This water is life. Water gives us new life. Water is a place of respite, right? And we also know that that's so true, right, in our spiritual life and in our sacraments. And I just invite you to really think, or maybe we can have a few people yell out from the audience. I'm used to high school people falling asleep already. How do you feel? Like, how do you feel what were you feeling as you were either talking about that place or kind of meditating on it?
Rejuvenated.
Rejuvenated? Yeah.
Peaceful.
Peace.
Peaceful.
Peace.
Comfortable. Comfortable.
Yeah.
Joyous. Connected. Happy.
Happy. Yeah.
I was actually thinking of
Returning, yeah, of going back to that place, of making a pilgrimage, right, of walking those sacred holy ground that place is for you, right? And so, so that's creation spirituality right there. Like, that's it, right? Is recognizing the gift that God has given us in this earth, in this place, and naming that and knowing that, right? This last slide was just a reminder that as we're thinking about creation spirituality and about Laudato Si, I always like to think about threads on a tapestry, right? Or if we're going back to that web imagery, I'm a knitter. And when we think about Catholic social teaching and the Jesuits particularly, we have these universal apostolic preferences. A lot of times we think about like care for creation or creation, it's like over there, right? Like the green team's taking care of that, right? And then we've got like the rest of what we're doing. And so just as we're going through this, I invite you to think about how these are interconnected threads, right? When we're thinking about Catholic social teaching and gratitude for creation, we know that that's not separate from the dignity of the human person. That's not separate from the dignity and the rights of workers. It's not separate from our own right to have access to creation, but our responsibility to steward it, right? And so that's the invitation, to make sure that we recognize that everything is interconnected. Like I said before, this isn't a new concept. It didn't start with St. Hildegard, but I just really like St. Hildegard, and so I was just, wanted to start with her. We think about Jesus. I mean, what did Jesus do with his entire ministry? He walked around outside and talked to people, and he talked a lot about nature. He has a lot of nature parables, and I have a worksheet over there that has a lot of scripture and nature parables. And you think about, again, that idea that we can discover a teaching from God in creation. And then we think, well, yeah, gosh, Jesus talked about this a lot, didn't he? With the scattering of the seeds, right? With the do not worry, why do you worry? Be like the birds of the air and the lilies of the field, right? And so I'm just going to share a couple of examples of creation spirituality. These are not the only ones, but I love St. Hildegard. And so something that she talked about as kind of an early example of creation spirituality is what she called viriditas, which means the greening power of God. So when she thought of God, she thought of life and greening and growth, and that is our Creator. So she says the Word is living, being, spirit, all verdant greening, all creativity. This Word manifests itself in every creature, right? And so she talked about this as viriditas, that God, when we think about God and when we think about what I think is the core of the gospel, which is about living abundant life and more abundantly and having that abundant life for ourselves and for future generations, that's the greening power of God, right? And she compares that to ariditas, right? To this dryness, right? To this sense of struggle. And when I think about creation spirituality in my own life, and what has been helpful to me, I kind of sometimes do a check-in of myself of like, am I feeling like verdant and greening in what I'm doing? Or am I feeling like really dried and shriveled and closed off and disconnected from God or from other people or from myself or from the earth, right? And so that's a simple invitation into creation spirituality or ecological spirituality. St. Francis is also our other great example of creation spirituality. And what I love about St. Francis is that I'm going to talk a lot more about this concept of integral ecology, but that with St. Francis, he was concerned we think about him like preaching to the birds and kind of being like an outdoor dude, but his conversion experience was actually with a leper, right? And so he understood that concern for God's creation and concern for the poor and the outcast are one concern in our spirituality and in our faith. And so this is from a book about St. Francis's life, and I think this is kind of the best understanding or best passage that I've ever read of our hope of putting on the eyes of creation spirituality. So in the Canticle of Creation, which thank you again for that beautiful song at the beginning, we started to sing the praise of God. Francis calls out to all of creation as brothers and sisters, revealing the core of the Franciscan worldview. That God is the source of all being. The Creator God is parent, mother, and father of all creatures who are therefore brother and sister to one another. Because all of creation is a part of the divine family, everything created, animate and inanimate, deserves brotherly and sisterly love and respect. The divine image or spark, the imago Dei, that exists in human creatures exists in all creatures, right? And so this invitation, I think we talk a lot, and we have a lot of reverence, which is very beautiful in the Catholic Church for the Holy Family, right? We love them, we adore them. But what St. Francis is inviting us into is to expand that love to the divine family, which encompasses all things. It encompasses birds, it encompasses people who are migrating, it encompasses that sunrise, right? And so how are we spreading our philios and our agapic love to encompass all of creation, right? And so Martin Buber, great theologian, he talks about the need to transition from an I-it to an I-thou relationship, right? So right now, with a lot of creation, like I get to see these beautiful trees. I usually look at people, but your background is so lovely back there, right? So a lot of us would relate to that tree as an it, right? As a thing, as an other. And And I would argue even more and more these days, especially with the rhetoric happening in our country, we're also relating to other people as it's, right? We're othering people and we're othering creation. And so Martin Buber's entire theology is that we have to move from an I-it to an I-thou, right? And understanding that the other beings around us have inherent dignity and inherent worth. And if I recognize that, then I can't treat you as disposable, right? That I can't treat you, whether you're human or non-human, as lesser or as something to be used for my own benefit. So this is the goal. This is the goal, to be like St. Francis, right? To say, praise be to you, God, and to live with that great sense of gratitude, right? I'm going to skip through some of this. Like, we love Catholic social teaching. I just want to show that, like, other popes besides Pope Leo have talked about this issue. St. John Paul II talked about the ecological crisis as a moral issue. And then Pope Benedict is known as the Green Pope. Like, Pope Francis took a lot of Pope Benedict's writing and put them into Laudato Si, right? And so we don't always know that or think about that. And I think sometimes our church and our world gets really politicized, but Pope Benedict has done a lot of really great work to promote this understanding. And so we're going to get into Laudato Si now, and I'm going to have us do like another eco-spirituality practice. But I just recently presented at Barry University, which is an Adrian Dominican university in Florida. And they were asking me, like, why do we even need eco-spirituality, right? Like, what's the point of this? And so Gus Speth is an environmentalist. He's a scientist. And I think that this quote also shows the great gift that us as people of faith have in this moment, which is, he said, I used to think that our top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystems collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address the problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that, right? So we have all of the scientific knowledge we need to, like, if we wanted to tomorrow, if we had the political will, we could not, you can't really reverse climate change, but we could, like, make it stop. We know everything that we need to do to make that happen. But we have not gone from our head to our hearts yet to have the will and the conversion needed to make sometimes sacrifices, right? To make that change, sacrifices out of love. And so that is our call as Christians and as Catholics, is to think about, how do we address this spiritual problem? Pope Francis says in Laudato Si that external deserts have grown so vast because the interior deserts are expanding, right? And so that's our invitation when Pope Francis writes Laudato Si. And do we have any Latin scholars? What does Laudato Si mean? Praise be, right? Praise be. And this comes from the Canticle of the Creatures, right? That St. Francis wrote. And he says, Laudato si, Signore, right? So that's to God, right? So it means praise be to you, right? And so this is my cat, my former cat. She has since passed, Fran Cat. And I put this photo here because it was during the pandemic. I was working from home. I'm not from Cleveland. I never wanted to live there, as I said. I lured this stray cat into my life using scrambled eggs, because I'm a vegetarian and cats don't eat plants and I don't eat meat. So eggs are where we could meet in the middle. And I looked over during the pandemic, and I just had this moment of, like, deep gratitude of, wow, I live in Cleveland, Ohio. I have this little creature that I've lured into my life, and, like, I love her, and she loves me, and she loves that squirrel that she's looking at in the tree. Well, I don't know if she loves it, but she is noticing it, right? And it was really this little glimpse, this little moment of, oh my gosh, it's amazing that any of this is at all. So when we think back to that creation story that we just heard, in the beginning, right, there was void, there was nothing. And when you really like think about this tonight when you go home, because we don't have enough time right now, but like when you think about it, not a single one of us in this room did anything to bring ourselves into existence. None of us made ourselves exist. We just like ended up here one day, which is like wild. And sometimes like when I'm like, oh, what do I think about the afterlife? Like I know I kind of, you believe in it, but then you're like, oh. And I was thinking about it and I was like, gosh, if you told me before I ended up in this world that this world exists, I would be like, no way. Like there's a world with butterflies and a water cycle, right? And all of these amazing things, right? And yet here I am in this world, having done nothing to be here. What a gift. None of this had to be. We could have had a God who said, no, I'm good. Like I've got like the 3 in me people and I'm fine. Like I can entertain myself, I'm good, right? But instead we have a universe and we have the sun and the sky and like death, right? Sister Death. St. Francis talks about the fact that our lives are limited, right? And that actually makes them really special. Right? And the fact that we're all here on this planet at this moment of crisis when we need action, like the odds, I'm not a mathematician, but the odds are like 1 in a billion, right? Like that would happen and that we would be alive right now and that we would be together in this room right now. And thinking back through our whole family trees, like that my great whatever grandmother like tripped and then she didn't get, I don't know, eaten by whatever, like some large predator, right? It's amazing. So it's amazing that we're all here. It's a gift, right? And when you think about these photos from Artemis II, right? And I just love that you can actually see our very thin atmosphere, right? That exists. And that life can exist because of that thin layer. And then when we start to think about deep time, and I mean, gosh, just looking at rock formations could be a whole eco-spirituality practice in itself when we think about the millions and hundreds of millions of years that are just contained right there. And the fact that in all of the Earth's history, I was told I'm not supposed to move, and I'm sorry, but I'm going to move 1 second. That this little line right here is all of human history, right? So that's, if we think about all of humans, like that's how long we've been around, right? Wow, okay? So we are here, we are having an impact, and wow, what are the words? It'll take your breath away if you like really sit in it. I'll share all of my slides if anybody wants them. There's a philosopher whose name is escaping me right now, and I really apologize. I will look it up. But he asks you to do this thought experiment, right? When we think about, because we think about, the climate change impacts are going to happen at the end of the century. Well, that sounds far away. I haven't lived a century, right? So this philosopher asks us to do this thought experiment. We say, imagine in every single generation since humans have been alive, one person, at least, makes it to 100 years old, okay? If we wind up those lives back to back, it only takes 7 100-year-old human lives to get back to the Renaissance from where we are today. It only takes 20 human lives, 100-year-old lives lined up, to get back to the time of Jesus, right? And then 35 to get back to like the ancient Egypt and the pyramids, right? So then when we start to think about the end of the century, well, gosh, the kids who are born today are going to be alive then. The next generation is already here, right? And so it's just this invitation as we're thinking about this web of life. It's not only through space, but it's through time, right? As we think about the communion of saints, as we think about this call as Christians to carry this web forward. And so St. Ignatius believed that ingratitude was the cause, beginning, and origin of all sin and evil in the world. And when I stop to think about that, when I think about the ecological crisis that we're in, that actually feels really true. It's not necessarily power, right? It's that we forget that amazing thing that we are here, that we are alive, that this is a gift, right? and then we start to treat things as in that I-it relationship versus I-thou, right? So we've got this anthropocentrism. I forgot that I have one of these, right? Where humans are at the top, and I think we've thought for a long time that even in our creation story, oh, well, we're supposed to have dominion over the earth, right? But the call more and more is to humility, to understand that we are part of nature. We are not the pinnacle, right? That we need to have a little humility. Humus is like that really rich soil at the top that things can grow in, and it's also the root word for human and for humility. So again, as we're thinking about creation spirituality, what could staring at some dirt remind us of? What could thinking about ashes to ashes, dust to dust, every Lent, and really thinking about our lives in that sense of deep time and future generations. And then just finally, before we get into this next reflection, just the idea of Eucharist, which we know means Thanksgiving. Oh, so much better than high school students, right? That every Sunday when we get together for liturgy, for Mass, the center of that is thanksgiving, is awe, is gratitude. Even though a lot of the time we go, thanks be to God. It just always makes me laugh. I'm like, what about St. Francis? Like, thanks be to God, praise be to God. This is amazing, right? But we walk around forgetting what a gift it is. And so the other great gift of ecological spirituality, and I think of like comparative theology, is that we can learn from other traditions. So we know that indigenous communities have this is a part of their cosmology from the center. And so there's a great author and scientist, her name's Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she wrote this book called Braiding Sweetgrass. I highly recommend it. And in it, she talks about how she lived in Peru for a while. And so when she lived there, she would go to the market to buy everything that she needed. And one night she had a dream that she was at the market and she went to her normal vendors, but instead of paying for things, they said, take it, it's free, it's a gift. And she said, that radically changed my relationship to what I was taking because it was a gift, I only took what I needed. You know, especially with grocery prices as they are these days, when I am at the grocery store, I am trying to get a deal, right? How much can I get for the least amount of money, right? And she's saying we have to move away from that kind of transactional thinking into this sense of thanksgiving, of it's all a gift, it's a gift. And so I can't take more than I need, right? And so she talks about the idea of to name the world as gift is to feel one's membership in the web of reciprocity. It makes you happy, it makes you accountable. Conceiving of something as a gift changes your relationship to it in a profound way, even though the physical makeup of the thing has not changed. So you can think in your own life, what's something that someone has gifted to you that you really cherish? And how much more valuable is it to you because of that relationship with that person versus if you went and bought it on your own, right? And so what if we could change our relationship with creation so that we really felt in our heart of hearts, right? That this water that we have here is a gift, that this food that we have here is a gift, right? And Pope Francis says, like really in Laudato Si', one of the things, he calls for a lot of things. He calls for us to dismantle the technocratic paradigm, but he also says, hey, we should probably pray before meals more, like genuinely. Like that could be the start of an ecological conversion, right? And so that leads me into this other reflection. And so I would invite you, I'm gonna read this and then I'm gonna invite you into another reflection and to talk a little bit, and then I'll wrap up because I think I've been talking for a long time, but I get really excited about this stuff. So this is a reflection from Thich Nhat Hanh, who is Buddhist, and I just, from Steve Pope and from Michael Himes at Boston College, something that I learned is that when you get to the heart of religions at their center, there are like these core concepts that are always the same, right? And so for Thich Nhat Hanh, he says, if you're a poet, you'll see that there's a cloud floating in this sheet of paper. Without a cloud, there's no rain. Without rain, the tree cannot grow. Without trees, we cannot make paper. The cloud is essential for the paper to exist. If the cloud is not here, the sheet of paper cannot be here either. So we can say the cloud and the paper inter-are. Interbeing is a word that's not in the dictionary yet, but if we combine inter with to be, we have a new verb. If we look into the sheet of paper even more deeply, we can see the sunshine in it. For if the sunshine's not there, the forest cannot grow. In fact, nothing can grow. Even we cannot grow without sunshine. And so we know that the sunshine is also in the sheet of paper. The paper and the sunshine inter-are. And if we continue to look, we can see the logger who cut the tree and brought it to the mill to be transformed into paper. And we see the wheat. We know the logger cannot exist without his daily bread, and the wheat that became his bread is also in the sheet of paper. And the logger's father and mother are in it too. When we look in this way, we see that without all of these things, the sheet of paper could not exist. Right? And so I just invite you now just to take a moment. Again, you can close your eyes or not. And to either look at a piece of clothing that you're wearing, or if you still have some food in front of you, you can also meditate on your food. But I just invite you to take a moment and really think about, where did this thing that I'm wearing or that I ate, where did it start? Where did it come from? What were all of the earth and natural forces that needed to happen for it to grow? If you're looking at something plastic, we can thank the dinosaurs and the fossils, right? We get fossil fuels from them, right? So what had to happen for this thing to exist? And then just take a minute and think about, who were all of the hands and the forces that needed to touch it along the way to get it to you? So who picked it, or mined it, or extracted it? Where did it go after that? Who touched it, transformed it? How was it shipped? How were the workers paid who were in charge of transporting this thing? How did it end up? Where did you buy it? Where did you get it? And where will it go when you're done using it? Right? And so, invite you back into the room. When we see in this way, when I think about the sweater, I'm like, there are hundreds of people. I wouldn't even be able to get dressed in the morning without hundreds of people and forces in this world, and natural forces. Right? And we kind of walk around forgetting that, or even with our cell phones, these things are amazing, right? And I just think about if somebody from the 1800s could see one of these things now, they'd be like, whoa, praise God, wow, what's that? You can talk to someone across the world, right? We kind of lose that sense of awe and wonder somehow in modernity. So invitation, the next time that you are maybe eating, doing a little meditation on where every single ingredient comes from. I was eating cottage cheese the other day, and I was thinking, I wonder how many, it was kind of gross, but it was kind of fascinating. I was I wonder how many different cows' milk is in this cottage cheese, right? It's kind of like the ocean, right? Because of the way that we source things, and where did they come from, and where are the farms, right? And so we are interconnected. And so the ultimate goal, and I'm gonna wrap up soon, is but the ultimate goal is to be serenely present to each reality, however small, that it opens up to much greater horizons of understanding and personal fulfillment. So this is my cat. He got caught in a rainstorm. and that is our experience sometimes. We are caught in an experience that we were not expecting. We see what is happening, right? And so our invitation is to integral ecology. And what that means is that everything is interconnected, right? That's what Pope Francis says. We're all interconnected in these systems, and we're a part of a network which we'll never fully understand. And in Spanish, integral, what does it mean? Whole, right? And so when we're thinking about integral ecology, we're thinking about the wholeness of our earth. How are we making it whole? And then when we think about the word eco, a lot of times when we hear eco, we're like, oh, the tree out there, over there. The origin word for that is oikos. It's Greek, and it means home, right? So when we think about ecology, it's not about something out there, it's the study of our home. And so integral ecology is how are we interconnected, how are we living in this web of life, and how are we making that home whole? Okay, because nature cannot be regarded as something separate from ourselves. We are a part of nature and thus in constant interaction with it. And I think that that's something that's really profound from Laudato Si, because in my Catholic upbringing, I was told, oh, humans are separate from nature. We're above, we're different, right? And Pope Francis is clearly saying, no, we are in it, we are not separate from it. And this is my favorite tree in Cleveland. That's where I imagine my particular place a lot of the times, right? And so if everything's interconnected, it invites us into develop a spirituality of global solidarity, which flows from the mystery of the Trinity, right? So God is interconnected. And then, so we know this, we see it. And then this is, buddy, he's looking at his sister, Jovi, and he's like, why are you up there, right? So sometimes we have to judge what is happening. I take catechesis very seriously. I forgot to say that. And so we have to say, why is that happening? So integral ecology means everything's interconnected, but it's also an understanding that our economic, political, and social systems are connected. And we cannot think about, these are kind of three issues that we work on at the Ignatian Solidarity Network. Ecological justice is not separate from racial justice. It's not separate from migration justice. It's not separate from economic justice, right? So everything's interconnected. So we know that when Jackson, Mississippi, the capital, flooded a few years ago and people didn't have access to water, we have to start asking, well, why is that? Most other capital cities in the country, that wouldn't happen. Well, 80% of the population is Black, right? And so what are our social, political, historical practices that have made that reality true? And how is the earth interacting with society there and with our systems? When we think about climate migration and forced migration from Venezuela, we know that hurricanes have gone through that area and crops have failed, and that has forced people to migrate to the United States. And we know what's happening with our social and political system and how we are treating migrants, right? And so it's just this understanding that we have to know that everything's interconnected. For me, I grew up in Tennessee and I really loved eating meat, but now I'm a vegetarian. And I read this book in college, Fast Food Nation. And I didn't really care about the environment at that time, but I did care about migrant workers. And that book taught me that migrant workers were working in the slaughterhouses and that their lives were being put in danger due to our food system, right? And so that was my kind of like first aha moment of like, oh, this environmental system and the social system and migration are all interconnected, right? And then I went on to work at our Cristo Rey High School in Cleveland. We have lots of great Catholic high schools. This is one of them. I was a cross-country coach, but growing up in Tennessee, barely any kids on my team had asthma, but most of the kids on the team I was coaching had asthma. We were also in a historically red line district in Cleveland, so we had very little tree cover, and this was a rubber factory that we would run by, and I would always see dead birds outside of it as we were on our runs. And so I'm like, well, the system that is killing the birds is also probably not very good for our lungs. And why is it that we are in this situation on the east side of Cleveland, and there are a lot of suburban Catholic schools that aren't dealing with this, right? And so we understand that historical racism and redlining are playing a part in our health and in this system. And so I guess just to say, right, my students' lives are precious, right? They're just as precious as any other lives. But we are in that kind of I-it relationship as a society with some communities with some sacrifice zones, right? And so in order to trash the planet, you have to trash people, right? But we don't. This is from Van Jones, The Economic Injustice of Plastic, right? But he has a very Pope Francian view of things, right? We don't have disposable resources, we don't have disposable species, and we don't have disposable people, right? It's all precious. And so that is the invitation of ecological spirituality, is to remind us of the preciousness of creation of our world, right? And to read the signs of the times. So this next generation, we're leaving a lot on their shoulders, a lot of opportunity for more injustice to perpetuate itself. And so hopefully this spirituality is going to move us to action. Sorry, I have 2 more slides and then I promise I'm gonna stop talking. Okay, this is, as we're thinking about our web of life, a lot of times I'll use kind of different issues like garment workers and deportations and war to talk about these issues. But I was talking to Father Tom, and I was saying, it's really interesting. Do we all know what this is at this point? The Strait of Hormuz, right? So when we're thinking about this precious web of life, well then, how does that, and then we've got MRI machines. I have multiple sclerosis, so I get MRIs all the time, right? Well, who knew that helium was a byproduct of the gas industry, right? And so now we've got this gas shortage. Now maybe our access to medical care is going to change. We've got some fertilizer over here. We've got girls in school. We've got migrant workers here, and we've got food. It's those all seem like separate issues, right? But with these eyes of integral ecology, we understand this is all interconnected. We see this. We saw it with COVID. We see it now that food prices are going to go up for the vast majority of the globe because we can't have access to fertilizer. There are some countries, specifically in Sri Lanka, they're shortening their school weeks to 4-day weeks. So school kids aren't getting as much of an education because of the oil shortage, right? And the oil shock, right? And then migrant workers from Nepal, their families are dependent on their work aboard ships, right? They're not able to send money back to their families, right? And so we understand we live in this interconnected system. And so the hope and the prayer is that through our sense of solidarity, we remember that the web of life is one and we take action, right? To hear the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. That is kind of the key quote from Laudato Si. And so this is kind of our hope, that in understanding that everything is interconnected and everything is sacred through ecological spirituality, through this deep felt sense in our hearts, not just our heads, that will create a conversion in us. How am I feeling called to change individually, and how are we collectively being invited to change? But conversion doesn't always translate to action, right? Sometimes I can be in my heart, I know I should or I want to do this thing, right? But then we have to have the courage to take action and to respond in love. Because if everything is gift and it's been given to us as a gift, our natural response from God, right, a loving God, is to want to respond in love, right? And so that's our invitation, to move from our head to our heart to our hands, right? That's what Laudato Si invites us into, and that's what creation spirituality invites us into, to get out of our heads, to become humble, to move to our hearts, and hopefully through that heartfelt knowing of God and of the other, to take action. Okay, because to act, and I'm going to skip through a lot of this. How do you eat a cake? One bite at a time. So inviting you to think about, what's my piece to do? There's something called the Laudato Si Action Platform. There are 7 goals around it that you could take action on. And the one thing that I will point out, I have lots of action projects that I want to share about. But for this group, I don't know if you've heard of the Rocking Chair Rebellion, but they're a part of Third Act. And so they've been going out with rocking chairs to protest, right? And to put themselves kind of on the front lines, right? To do a blockade around Chase Bank, because the founder, Bill McKibben, was basically we're in the third act of our lives. And so we have the ability to sacrifice a little bit more, right? If I get thrown in jail right now, that's going to make it really hard for me to work in a Catholic school in the future if that's something that I want to do, right? And so his idea is really that elders of our community are being called to take action and to be really creative in the way that they're taking action. So there's a social change wheel. Wherever we are in life, we have something that we can share. And so do what you are doing. You don't have to do everything, but what's one thing that you could do? That's an Ignatian quote of focus on the task at hand. Or what am I already doing? And how could I integrate some creation spirituality or respond in love to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor? Because we cannot do everything. And there's a center of liberation in that, because it allows us to do something and to do it well. So rather than a problem to be solved, the world is a joyful mystery to be contemplated with gladness and praise. So that's our invitation with creation spirituality. And from Karl Rahner, you are an unrepeatable onceness wherever you are on your life's journey, and you have a unique gift to share. This problem is so big and that's overwhelming, but the great gift of that is that means we need everybody's gifts. If you've got a gift, we can use it, right, to address creation care, because we are the ancestors that future generations need, and those future generations are now, and those future generations are coming. And so let us sing as we go, as Pope Francis says, and unite together. And so hope this is an invitation to kind of see creation with those new eyes, and then that kind of spurs us to take some action. So thank you.